These aren't just side effects, they're transport mechanisms. They allow the biosphere to move, adapt, evolve. And through it all, the atmosphere remains just thick enough to matter. It extends about 100 kilometers up, but most of its mass is within the first 10 to 15. That narrow band contains everything we breathe, every cloud we see, every sound we hear. Beyond that, space begins. There's no sharp edge, just a slow thinning until there's nothing left. That thinness makes it fragile, but it also makes it functional. It allows sunlight through. It lets heat escape. It holds in just enough. This thin envelope is also what makes flight possible. Birds, insects, planes all rely on air pressure and lift. Even seeds and spores ride the air. The atmosphere isn't just a shield, it's a medium, a space where motion happens. And yet, despite all of this, the atmosphere doesn't call attention to itself. It's easy to forget that every breath is a product of planetary systems, that the oxygen in your lungs might have come from an Amazon tree or an ocean microbe, that the air around you is not just empty space, but the result of billions of years of feedback, adaptation, chemistry, and motion. It's not that the atmosphere is conscious, but its behavior suggests structure, not random drift, but cycles, not stasis, but equilibrium. The kind of regulation that hints at a system with constraints, thresholds, memory. Even if the materials are right, even if the chemistry works, timing still matters. Not just in seconds or hours, but across vast scales, seasons, cycles, ages. On Earth, things don't just happen. They happen at intervals, at rhythms. Some fast, some slow, some measured in the slow ticking of geological time. There's nothing mechanical about these cycles, yet they act like a clock, not built, but real. And it's that timing that keeps everything functioning. Earth rotates once every 24 hours. That rotation gives us day and night. It sets the pace for sleep, activity, photosynthesis. Every living thing, from insects to trees to people, has internal mechanisms that sync with that pattern. Circadian rhythms, hormonal cycles, flowering and feeding times. These are not just responses to light. They're programs shaped by millions of years of repetition. The planet turns, and life turns with it. The year too is fixed. One orbit around the sun takes about 365.25 days. That motion, combined with the planet's axial tilt, creates the seasons. They're not just cosmetic. They shape migrations, trigger breeding cycles, regulate growth. Bears hibernate, birds fly, crops ripen. Even microorganisms time their behavior to seasonal cues. That kind of coordination wouldn't be possible without consistent orbital timing. And the orbit itself is unusually stable. Earth's path around the sun is nearly circular, with just enough eccentricity to cause variation in solar input without causing extremes. Some planets have more elliptical orbits, which leads to hotter summers and colder winters. Earth's near constant distance from the sun keeps solar energy within a range that supports life year-round, even with seasonal shifts. But the planet's motion includes more than just rotation, an orbit. There's precession, a slow wobble in the axis like a spinning top that takes about 26,000 years to complete. There's also obliquity, changes in the tilt angle itself, and variations in orbital eccentricity over time. These cycles, known as Milankovitch cycles, influence long-term climate patterns. Ice ages, glacial advances, shifts in rainfall. They're all tied to these deeper rhythms. The timing isn't perfect, it's probabilistic, but it's regular enough to shape history. Even the moon participates. Its orbit affects tides, of course, but also the length of the day. Over billions of years, the moon's gravitational pull has been slowing Earth's rotation. The days are getting longer, a few milliseconds per century. That's slow, but it adds up. 1 billion years ago, a day was closer to 18 hours. That matters for biology. It affects how long organisms can photosynthesize, how internal clocks sync, how heat builds and dissipates. Evolution didn't happen in a fixed frame. It adapted to a moving one. Other cycles run in parallel. Solar activity follows an 11-year pattern, with peaks and dips in sunspot numbers and solar radiation. That activity affects Earth's magnetic field, influences satellite systems, and possibly plays a role in subtle climate shifts. Geological cycles unfold over tens or hundreds of millions of years. The movement of tectonic plates, the opening and closing of ocean basins, the rise and fall of mountain ranges. Even mass extinctions show a kind of periodicity, though the causes are still debated. Then there's biology itself. Inside every cell, molecular clocks run continuously, measuring time with proteins that rise and fall in repeating loops. These loops aren't just reactions, they're mechanisms that anticipate. The cell doesn't just respond to light, it expects it. Genes turn on and off at certain times of day. Repair systems activate when damage is most likely. Behavior isn't just reactive, it's timed. In humans, internal clocks regulate sleep, body temperature, hormone release, digestion. Jet lag is what happens when the internal time gets out of sync with the external one. Health problems can emerge when those rhythms are disrupted. The body needs consistency, not rigidity, but pattern. And that pattern comes from Earth's motion. Even reproduction follows cycles, menstrual periods, gestation times, mating seasons, all linked directly or indirectly to light and time. Some of those links are clear, others are buried deep in evolutionary history, shaped by ancient timing mechanisms that no longer serve obvious functions, but still tick in the background. And beyond biology, there's cultural time. Humans created calendars to track the sun and the moon. Agricultural systems depend on planting and harvesting at the right time. Religious rituals align with solstices, equinoxes, lunar phases. Our entire concept of timekeeping, seconds, hours, years, is built around Earth's movements. We carry watches on our wrists, but they're just miniaturized versions of cosmic rhythms. None of this implies control. The Earth doesn't know it's turning. The sun doesn't track its position. The moon doesn't count the tides. But the outcomes show up as consistency, as repetition, as rhythm. Not because someone set it that way, but because it stayed that way, long enough for life to notice. And once life noticed, it built those rhythms into itself. What stands out is how these rhythms layer. The fast cycles, day and night, rest on slower ones, seasons, years, orbital variations, and those rest on deeper cycles still. The shifting of continents, the rise of mountain chains, the aging of stars. Each layer affects the ones above it. Together they form a kind of scaffolding, not imposed from outside, but emerging from interaction, movement, inertia. That scaffolding creates windows of opportunity, times when certain conditions line up: warmth, light, moisture, stability, and new forms of life emerge. Other times, it creates pressure, ice, drought, competition, change. Life adapts to both, but it needs time to do it. And Earth's regularity gives it that time. There's a difference between predictability and purpose. The fact that a clock keeps time doesn't mean someone needs to be watching it, but it does mean you can build on it. Earth, as it turns out, is buildable. Life, weather, chemistry, culture, all layered on top of consistent timing, and none of it works if the pace slips too far off course. There are parts of biology that feel like they came together one improvement at a time. You can trace them, small changes, small advantages, slow shift over generations. But then there are features that seem to leap ahead, not because they're unexplainable, but because they work so well it's hard to imagine how they ever worked partially. The human eye is one of those. It's often pointed to as an example of complexity, a system with many parts, each dependent on the others. Light enters through a clear cornea. The iris adjusts to control brightness. The lens focuses the image. The retina converts photons into electrical signals. Those signals travel along the optic nerve to the brain. where the image is constructed, not passively received, but actively interpreted. Every second, the eyes take in millions of inputs and sort them into motion, color, contrast, distance, threat, comfort. What makes this more interesting is that the eye isn't just a light sensor. It's a dynamic optical system. The lens adjusts shape for near or far vision. The pupils widen or shrink in response to both light and emotional state. Tiny muscles track objects, stabilize the field of view, and coordinate with head and body movements. The eye doesn't work alone. It's embedded in a system of coordination and prediction. And it's not just the hardware. The brain adds layers of processing, edge detection, color correction, pattern recognition. It fills in blind spots. It stabilizes the world even while the head is moving. It interprets what's seen based on memory, expectation, and context. Vision is an interaction, not a direct recording. The usual explanation is evolutionary. Eyes developed from light-sensitive patches on early organisms. Over time, these patches became deeper, formed lenses, added muscles, refined focus. You can find versions of this process in nature today, from simple photoreceptors in jellyfish to complex compound eyes in insects to sophisticated vertebrate eyes like ours. Each step brings a survival advantage, even if the system isn't yet complete. That explanation holds up under study. But what's notable is how far the eye has developed, not just in humans, but in other animals too. Birds of prey can see UV light and detect movement at great distances. Some shrimp can see polarized light and detect colors we can't imagine. Cats and owls can function in near darkness. Squid have camera-like eyes structured differently from ours, but reaching similar functionality. These aren't weak, approximate versions of vision. They're tuned systems, fast, responsive, high resolution. And the eye is just one example. Echolocation in bats and dolphins involves sending out high-frequency sound pulses and interpreting the reflections. It's a full three-dimensional mapping system, done in milliseconds, underwater or in flight. Electric fish use fields to detect objects in murky environments. Some insects see in ultraviolet or infrared. Some snakes sense heat from warm bodies. These systems don't just detect, they analyze. They work in real time. They interpret noise as structure. Even something as common as the human hand is an engineering marvel. Multiple bones, tendons, muscles, nerves, all coordinated to produce fine motion. The opposable thumb allows grip and manipulation. The fingertips can detect textures at a microscopic level. The coordination between vision and touch allows for precision that machines still struggle to match. Playing a musical instrument, typing on a keyboard, tying a knot, these aren't brute force movements. They're timed, tuned, and constantly adjusted. Some parts of the body regenerate, some self-repair. Skin heals, bones knit. The liver can regrow after damage. Other parts don't repair as easily. Neurons, for example. But even there, the underlying design is efficient. The brain rewires. It forms new pathways. It compensates for damage. There's flexibility built into the system. Not endless, but enough to survive. Then there's development. Every person begins as a single cell. That cell divides, differentiates, and organizes itself into tissues, organs, systems. The instructions for that process are embedded in the DNA, but the execution is three-dimensional, continuous, responsive. Cells signal to each other. They respond to gradients, concentrations, contact. The body isn't just assembled. It grows, from inside out, from simple to complex, while constantly checking, adjusting, and regulating. Certain processes are timed down to the hour, when organs form, when systems connect, when changes should happen. If the timing is off, development can fail. But most of the time, it doesn't. It proceeds with accuracy that rivals engineered systems. That accuracy doesn't guarantee perfection, but it allows for complexity to emerge reliably. You can find similar precision in less visible systems, The immune system detects and neutralizes threats based on memory and pattern recognition. The endocrine system adjusts energy levels, growth, stress response, reproduction. The cardiovascular system delivers oxygen and nutrients with incredible efficiency, adjusting flow on the fly, responding to movement, temperature, damage. All of these systems are made of cells. Each cell is a compartment with its own internal logistics: membranes, organelles, transport channels, waste removal. The cell runs itself, follows instructions, adapts to signals, and repeats the process constantly, dividing, dying, renewing. There's no single feature that proves anything. And yet when you stack the systems together, vision, motion, balance, coordination, communication, what you get isn't just survival. It's ability, awareness, creativity, the capacity to interact with the world in detailed, responsive ways. From the outside, humans might seem fragile, soft, slow, dependent on tools. But biologically, the human body is both adaptable and precise. It can run long distances, recover from injury, learn languages, manipulate tools, raise children, coordinate memory with planning, balance emotions with reasoning. Those aren't secondary traits. They're central to how humans operate. None of this argues against natural processes. Evolution provides a clear mechanism: variation, selection, adaptation. But even within that framework, some traits seem unusually successful, tuned not just for function, but for range. The eye doesn't just see, it adapts to light and dark, tracks motion, focuses near and far. The ear doesn't just hear, it detects tone, direction, rhythm. The body doesn't just move, it climbs, swims, dances, writes. These aren't lucky breaks. They're systems built on systems, refined over time, interacting across scales. There's no need to call them intentional, but they work with a completeness that makes them stand out. And this leads to a larger question, not just about how individual systems work, but how they work together. Integration, coordination. What keeps all of these processes in sync, and what allows them to respond to an environment that never stops changing? Some things happen because they must. Gravity pulls, water flows downhill, metal rusts. These are regular, predictable, mechanical. But some events aren't like that. They're specific, contingent, and once-off. An asteroid strikes, a molecule mutates, a volcano erupts. We call those accidents, not because they're mistakes, but because they could have gone differently. They didn't have to happen the way they did. But what's striking is how often those accidents lead to outcomes that, in hindsight, seem almost coordinated. Take the asteroid that struck Earth about 66 million years ago. It hit near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released more energy than 1 billion nuclear bombs. It vaporized rock, kicked up global firestorms, blacked out the sky, collapsed ecosystems, and it ended the age of the dinosaurs. That was not a slow evolutionary process. It was a reset, fast, violent, and complete. But it also cleared the ecological space that allowed mammals to expand, diversify, and eventually dominate. Without that single event, human beings might never have arrived. That's one event. There are others. Roughly 2.5 billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere began to fill with oxygen. Not because of a cataclysm, but because single-celled organisms learned how to use sunlight to split water. Photosynthesis. The byproduct was oxygen, which built up slowly in the atmosphere and oceans. At first, it was toxic to existing life. But over time, it enabled entirely new forms of metabolism. Higher energy yields, complex cells, eventually multicellular life. One biochemical innovation changed the entire trajectory of life on Earth. Not by design, but by consequence. Around 600 million years ago, multicellular organisms began to evolve more rapidly. Nervous systems, eyes, skeletons. A fossil record shows an explosion of diversity in what's called the Cambrian period. Some of that may have been triggered by oxygen levels reaching a certain threshold. Some by genetic innovations like the rise of regulatory genes that control body plans. Whatever the cause, the timing was narrow. A few million years in either direction, and the environment might not have supported the outcome. Even plate tectonics, the slow drift of continents, shapes outcomes in ways that seem disproportionate to the motion. The movement of land masses over millions of years changes ocean currents, isolates species, opens migration routes, blocks others. It creates mountain ranges, which influence rainfall. It moves species together or apart, and in doing so, it sets the terms for natural selection. Who survives, who mixes, who dies out. The formation of the moon, likely from a collision with a Mars-sized body, is another example. It was chaotic, high energy, and probably one of the rarest types of impacts. But the result was a stable moon that helps regulate Earth's tilt, tides, and rotational stability. Without it, climate patterns might shift too wildly for large ecosystems to hold together. None of these events were guaranteed. They weren't part of some schedule, but they had consequences far beyond their initial scope. Not just chain reactions, but turning points. Crossroads where one outcome reshaped what was even possible afterward. Biology, too, is full of what look like lucky breaks. The appearance of DNA as a stable information storage system, the rise of proteins with flexible functions, the emergence of eukaryotic cells, cells with internal compartments, like nuclei and mitochondria. That last step likely came from one cell engulfing another, not to eat it, but to work with it. A merger, a fluke that became permanent. That symbiosis allowed for larger, more complex organisms. Then there's sexual reproduction, which mixes genes and increases variation, speeding up evolution but requiring cooperation between individuals. Or the evolution of consciousness, not just behavior, but awareness, memory, planning, reflection. Not inevitable, not universal, but real. And linked to a network of prior developments, any one of which could have gone differently. Even the human brain, with its layers of function, motor control, pattern recognition, language, sits on top of biological history that began with simple responses to light or touch. Each layer required earlier systems to work. Neurons, then circuits, then coordination between regions. And at every stage, the conditions had to be right. Energy supply, protection, time to develop. Looking at all of this, one way to think about it is as a filter. Many planets may exist. Many may even have water or heat or the right chemistry. But to reach complexity, and then consciousness, and then civilization, a long list of things must line up. And not just in any order, in the right sequence, at the right intervals. The timing can't be off. Too soon, and the system fails. Too late, and the opportunity's gone. That doesn't make it planned, but it does make it rare. What's unsettling is how narrow some of those thresholds are. If the Earth was slightly close to the Sun, the oceans might boil. Slightly farther, and they might freeze. If gravity were weaker, the atmosphere might drift away. Stronger, and the planet might collapse into something uninhabitable. If the chemical properties of water were different, even slightly, cells might not hold together. If DNA didn't fold the way it does, replication would be unstable. If a meteor had hit 30 seconds earlier or later, the extinction pattern could have been different. When a system works, it's easy to overlook the dependencies. The supporting pieces vanish into the background. But when you break those pieces out and examine them, it becomes clear how much had to happen just to make the current version possible. Not perfect, but stable. Not ideal, but viable. The term fine-tuning often gets used here, but that implies intent. What's observable is precision, a convergence of variables that seems unusually compatible. Not because each part is exceptional, but because their relationship is. Timing, chemistry, physics, events, all stacked in a way that leaves very little room for error. And yet the system holds, it evolves, It changes, it breaks and rebuilds, but it doesn't collapse. Earth's history is full of accidents. Extinctions, collisions, reversals, shifts. And somehow those same events create new structures, more diversity, new pathways, higher complexity. It's not that the accidents are rare. It's that they keep resolving in ways that allow life to continue, sometimes narrowly, sometimes astonishingly. Long before telescopes, genetics, and data models, people looked at the world and asked where it came from. They saw the stars move across the sky. They watched storms, seasons, life, and death. And what they noticed most was regularity, patterns, cycles, things behaving in consistent ways, repeating across time. And when faced with regularity, the question that usually follows is, who or what made it that way? The earliest answers were personal: gods, spirits, ancestors, forces with names, intentions, and stories. In those systems, the world wasn't just a place, it was a creation. The mountains, the rivers, the sun and moon, even animals and people, all shaped by unseen beings who acted with purpose. Sometimes that purpose was benevolent, sometimes it was chaotic, but either way, it gave events meaning. A drought wasn't just weather, it was a message. A gift wasn't just luck, it was favor. Those ideas weren't random. They came from trying to understand something bigger than the individual, something that moved according to rules, but that also responded to behavior. And while modern science has replaced those explanations with models built on observation and testable predictions, the core impulse to look for agency behind structure hasn't disappeared. It's just changed format. In ancient cultures, design was linked to divinity. A complex object implied a maker. A beautiful form implied intention. You see this in Greek philosophy, where some thinkers imagined a prime mover, a shaping mind. You see it in Eastern traditions, where the world is treated not as a product, but as an unfolding system, deeply ordered. And you see it in religious texts, stories where creation is deliberate, even personal. Later, with the rise of monotheism and formal theology, the idea of design took on new language. Creation ex nihilo, purpose, divine will. The universe wasn't just shaped, it was chosen. It had a beginning, a goal, and a structure. That view held sway for centuries, not just in religious life, but in scientific thought as well. Early naturalists often saw their work as discovering the mind of God through the study of nature. Then, in the 19th century, Darwin offered a different model, one without foresight. Evolution by natural selection described how complex organisms could arise from simple beginnings through variation and filtering over time. It was a major shift, not because it denied design, but because it removed the need for it. You could explain biological order without invoking intention. That didn't answer all questions, but it changed the frame. Since then, science has moved further in that direction. The standard view now is that systems, whether biological, planetary, or cosmic, can emerge from the interaction of rules, matter, and time. Complexity from simplicity, not through construction, but through self-organization. At each stage, the process is local. No central control, just feedback, selection, and iteration. But even within that model, the sense of design persists, not in the traditional sense, not a watchmaker in the sky, but in the structure of the outcomes. The brain behaves like a computer. The genome behaves like a script. The laws of physics behave like a programming interface. These analogies aren't perfect, but they're persistent. We keep finding systems that remind us of the systems we make. And lately, that loop has tightened. Because now we don't just describe biology with engineering terms. We build biological tools using engineering. We write genetic code. We simulate ecosystems. We evolve digital organisms inside algorithms. We build models that design other models. And in doing so, we start to see the line between natural design and artificial design blur. Artificial intelligence, once a speculative concept, now writes, paints, translates, predicts. It doesn't think the way people do, but it processes structure, it finds patterns, and sometimes it finds solutions that surprise even its creators. Algorithms evolve, neural nets adjust, complex behavior emerges from simple rules. Sound familiar? This isn't to say that algorithms are divine, but they've forced a new question. Is design always conscious? Does order require a mind, or just a set of conditions? If a machine can create something meaningful without understanding it, then maybe understanding isn't necessary for construction. And if nature can create structure without intention, then maybe intention isn't the only route to complexity. That's where the conversation has landed, not between science and religion, but between different models of emergence. Some say the universe is self-organizing, others say it was shaped. But both sides agree. The results are structured. That structure can be described, analyzed, replicated, sometimes even predicted. And it runs deep, from physics to chemistry, from cells to consciousness. What's changed over time is how people talk about it. We no longer frame the world as built by hands. We talk about systems, about constraints, thresholds, probabilities. But the core idea, that function implies form, and form implies cause, still drives much of the curiosity. It shows up in everything from simulation theory to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If something works too well, we look for a reason. The difference now is scale. Ancient explanations stayed on Earth. Gods of rain, gods of fertility, gods of war. Now the questions reach further out. Was the universe itself configured to support life? Do other configurations exist where life fails? Are we the result of random sorting, or are we in a scenario that favors observers because only observers can notice it? That idea, the anthropic principle, doesn't answer the question, it reframes it. If you're in a universe where life exists, it's no surprise to find yourself able to observe it. But that doesn't explain why the universe permits observers at all. And so, the cycle continues. From gods to algorithms to simulation hypotheses, every version of the question comes back to the same point. The outcomes look like something that works, not always perfectly, not always gently, but with a level of precision, integration, and timing that resists easy dismissal. Started as metaphor. We described the brain as a machine, DNA as code, the cell as a factory. These comparisons weren't literal, but they helped explain things. They offered structure, a way to picture what couldn't be seen directly. But over time, the metaphors started to look less like illustrations and more like mirrors. As our digital systems grew more complex, they didn't just resemble biology. They began to behave like it. Simulations started small. A few rules, a few moving parts. A digital ant following a scent trail. A flock of virtual birds aligning in flight. But even in those early experiments, something interesting happened. Out of simple instructions came complex behavior. Not because it was programmed, but because the conditions allowed it. Interaction created emergence. That principle now powers everything from video game worlds to climate models. We feed in data, we define constraints, we press run. The system responds. Sometimes it surprises us, sometimes it fails. But more often than expected, it behaves in ways that feel familiar. Populations rise and fall. Cities form. Languages evolve. Artificial agents develop strategies we didn't write, not because they understand, but because the math supports it. Simulations don't create real worlds, but they can approximate them. They let us see what might happen if a variable shifts. Temperature rises, genes mutate, resources deplete. And through that, they've become more than tools. They've become thought experiments. Not just what is, but what could be. And at a certain point, the gap between model and reality starts to narrow. You can now simulate evolution itself. Digital organisms with virtual genomes mutate, compete, adapt. They develop locomotion, sensory patterns, even cooperative behavior. No one tells them how. They discover what works by trial. And because computers don't tire, these cycles run thousands of times faster than in nature. Evolution, compressed into hours. In some cases, the solutions they find are unfamiliar. Not optimal in a human sense, not elegant, but effective. Algorithms don't look for beauty. They look for success under the rules they've been given. And sometimes the things they produce, shapes, sequences, strategies, echo patterns found in the natural world. Spirals, branches, cycles, fractals, not copied, but rediscovered. That echo raises questions. If digital systems with minimal input tend toward certain forms, what does that say about those forms? Are they just efficient? Or is there something deeper, some underlying geometry that all systems, biological or artificial, fall into when given the chance? The simulation idea goes further. Some have proposed that our own universe might be a simulation, not figuratively, but literally. A digital environment running on a substrate we can't observe. The idea isn't science fiction anymore. It's a philosophical hypothesis, floated by physicists and computer scientists alike. If a civilization advanced far enough to simulate consciousness, the argument goes, there could be many more simulated realities than real ones. And statistically, we might be in one. There's no direct evidence for this. But there are oddities, limits in physics that look like resolution, discreteness in matter and energy, observations that collapse only when measured, boundaries that resemble computation more than continuum. These could just be features of the physical universe, or they could be artifacts, signs that the system we live in has edges, rules, shortcuts. Even if the simulation idea isn't true, it has utility. It forces a new perspective. If reality behaves like a system, we can study it like one. We can analyze its rules, map its parameters, search for consistency. We're not assuming purpose, we're acknowledging structure. Virtual reality adds another layer. We now create digital spaces so immersive that the brain begins to treat them as real. Games, training modules, design tools, all simulating environments that don't exist, yet still produce meaningful experience. In those spaces, perception becomes the main variable. If the brain accepts it, the difference between real and simulated begins to blur. And in those same systems, we now place agents, artificial intelligences that learn, respond, adapt. These entities don't think like people, but they process information, they explore options. Some even begin to show behaviors that mimic learning, not in a conscious sense, but in a pattern-seeking one. It's not hard to imagine a near future where simulations run not just for prediction, but for exploration. A world where we generate new chemicals, test new medicines, evolve new designs, all inside digital frameworks, and where the systems that find those solutions weren't written line by line, but trained, shaped, guided by selection. That's where the boundary starts to break, between writing a program and raising a program, between architecture and emergence. It's not that this replaces the old questions, it reframes them. If reality can be simulated, even partially, then the distinction between design and discovery becomes thinner. Maybe design is what happens when conditions favor certain outcomes. Maybe discovery is just recognizing what the structure already allows. Simulations don't have to be perfect, but if they produce systems that work, respond, adapt, then maybe they offer a kind of parallel creation. One we understand better, not by asking who built it, but by watching how it unfolds. If something looks structured, it's natural to ask if it was made that way. But the next question is harder. If it was designed, then why like this? Because this version of Earth is not perfect. It works, mostly. It sustains life, clearly. But it's also uneven, fragile, full of blind spots, trade-offs, and strange choices. Bodies wear down, ecosystems collapse, natural disasters kill without warning. The same systems that enable growth also allow for suffering. If it's a design, it's not clean. And that raises the possibility that it's not designed in the way people imagine it. The idea of a designed world usually comes with assumptions that things are made for a reason, that there's a best version, that problems are exceptions. But nature doesn't follow that logic. The most successful systems aren't the most elegant. They're the ones that survive long enough to matter, which often means the ones that are just good enough, not perfect, just stable. There are parts of Earth that feel like they were built to support life, the atmosphere, the tilt, the presence of water. But there are others that seem more indifferent. Earthquakes, viruses, genetic diseases, predators that evolve faster than prey that suffer without evolving at all, extinctions that wipe out entire branches of life before they have a chance to adapt. These aren't flaws in a blueprint. They're features of an open-ended process. Even in the human body, so often described in terms of precision, there are structural compromises. The spine, inherited from creatures that walked on four legs, struggles with the demands of upright posture. The eye has a blind spot where the optic nerve exits the retina. The trachea and esophagus share a path leading to a constant risk of choking. The brain, for all its capabilities, is prone to distortion, addiction, delusion, degeneration. Evolution explains this. Structures adapt slowly, often through reuse. A solution that works gets copied and modified, not redesigned from scratch. That leads to inefficiencies, overlapping functions, unnecessary complexity, vestigial organs. But it also leads to flexibility. A design that's good enough doesn't need to be optimized. So if we're talking about design, maybe it's not the kind we're used to. Not planned in advance, not guided by a single objective. Maybe it's more like emergent architecture, shaped by constraints, feedback, accident. In that frame, why like this becomes, why does this version keep surviving? Which is a different kind of question. There's also the issue of scale. Some patterns only look messy from up close. Zoom out and the rough edges blend into structure. Climate systems fluctuate, but over long periods they stabilize. Ecosystems collapse, then reform around new species. Genetic diversity creates vulnerabilities, but it also creates resilience. Life, as a whole, has lasted billions of years. That's not a sign of perfection. It's a sign of durability, but it still leaves room for wonder and for discomfort. Because for all the systems that seem finely balanced, there are just as many that seem arbitrary. Why does reproduction rely on randomness? Why do beneficial mutations take so long to spread? Why are so many parts of nature locked in cycles of violent starvation competition? The answer, from a design perspective, might be that suffering isn't a flaw. It's part of the mechanism. Pressure drives adaptation. Scarcity drives cooperation. Failure drives novelty. But that explanation carries weight. It implies a kind of moral distance, a system that works by letting parts of itself break. Humans tend to imagine better versions, a world without pain, without aging, without extinction. A body that repairs itself fully, a planet without tsunamis or drought. In those imagined worlds, the question flips. If Earth was designed, why wasn't it made more like those? The response might be that trade-offs are inevitable, that complexity requires risk, that evolution, or any self-modifying system, can't be tightly controlled without losing the ability to grow. But that's speculation. It assumes goals, and the patterns we see don't clearly point to one. They point to survival, not direction. In technology, humans design systems toward specific ends: speed, efficiency, safety. But nature doesn't optimize in those terms. It adapts for what works under pressure. That means some things are elegant, others are awkward. Some parts are ancient, others are improvised. The brain is powerful but also vulnerable. The immune system is adaptive but also reactive. Intelligence allows for planning, but also for anxiety. There's no consistent theme, no single idea that ties it all together, just a history of forms that seem to build on what came before, without ever fully restarting. If there's design in that, it's not centralized, it's distributed, layered, maybe even unconscious. The idea that Earth was designed doesn't require it to be perfect. But the reality we see, full of beautiful systems that sometimes fail in brutal ways, suggests that if design is present, it's operating under different rules, not human logic, not human goals, possibly not even human values. It's also possible that we're asking the wrong question, that design and randomness aren't opposites, that structure can arise without being imposed, that feedback, replication, and memory are enough to produce apparent intention. In that frame, why like this becomes less about meaning and more about consequence. Not who chose this, but what made this sustainable. There's a point in every system, no matter how detailed, tested, or well-modeled, where explanation stops. Not because there's nothing left to know, but because our tools have reached their limit. And when that point comes, something else moves in. Sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's questions, and sometimes it's belief. Science works by building boundaries, measurable, repeatable, observable. It deals with what can be tested. Gravity isn't a theory because someone believed in it. It's a theory because it predicts what will happen next. Same with thermodynamics, evolution, electromagnetism. The strength of science isn't in what it says about meaning. It's in how well it handles prediction. But people don't live only on prediction. They live on story, on purpose, on connection. And when those things can't be found in the equations, they're often found elsewhere, in frameworks that offer more than mechanisms, that speak in terms of why instead of how. For some, that's religion. For others, philosophy. And for many, it's a blend of the two. Tradition shaped by culture, family, language, and history. Systems of thought that help explain not just how the world works, but what the world means. And those systems don't disappear when science advances. They evolve alongside it. Physics, at its edge, begins to resemble philosophy anyway. Quantum mechanics doesn't just describe particles, it describes probabilities, observation, uncertainty. General relativity doesn't just explain motion, it rewrites the shape of space and time. These are not intuitive ideas, they stretch human language. They resist visualization, but they're real, confirmed by experiment, embedded in technology, guiding our understanding of the universe. And yet, even these models break down. We don't have a single theory that unites gravity with quantum mechanics. We don't know what dark matter is. We don't know why the constants of nature have the values they do, why the charge of the electron or the strength of the nuclear force fits exactly into the pattern that allows atoms to exist. These aren't small gaps, they're fundamental. Into those gaps, people bring meaning. Some say the universe simply is. No deeper reason, no hidden message, just a structure that happened to work, a roll of the cosmic dice that came up livable. Others see intention, not in the details necessarily, but in the fact that anything exists at all, that laws hold, that minds emerge, that order repeats itself in ways that allow reflection. Neither view can be proven, and neither one has to be. They're not models in the scientific sense, they're lenses. Ways of interpreting what science observes. What makes this space between science and faith interesting is how many of the same questions live in both. What is time? What is consciousness? What existed before the beginning? Where does order come from? These aren't spiritual questions by default, but they become spiritual when the answers turn into values, into identity, responsibility, purpose. Even belief in science requires a kind of trust. Not blind trust, but trust in method, in integrity, in the assumption that reality behaves consistently, that measurements matter, that cause and effect are more than illusion. These aren't beliefs in a supernatural sense. but they're still foundational. Science doesn't prove itself from the outside. It's a system that works because it assumes the world can be known. Faith, in its many forms, works differently. It doesn't require observation. It holds when evidence runs out. It offers story where data stops. That doesn't make it less real. It makes it suited to a different kind of question. For much of human history, science and faith weren't separated. Early scientists were often driven by religious motives, to uncover the workings of creation, to see the hand of God in the laws of nature. It's only in the past few centuries that the two have been framed as opposites. In practice, most people don't live strictly in one or the other. They live in the blend, trusting science to describe how, while turning to other systems to ask why. The interesting part is where they overlap. When faith tries to make scientific claims, it often runs into conflict. But when it speaks in metaphor, mystery, or meaning, it fills spaces science doesn't reach. And when science enters those same spaces, speculating about multiverses, simulations, or the nature of consciousness, it starts to sound like belief itself. This isn't failure, it's boundary testing. A sign that curiosity continues even after the models end. Many physicists acknowledge this openly. They describe the laws of the universe as elegant, surprising, or beautiful. They talk about simplicity hidden under chaos, symmetry breaking into complexity. They use words like fine-tuned, not to imply a tuner, but to describe how narrow the window is between a dead universe and a living one. Others look at the same data and see randomness, an ocean of possible outcomes, with this one just happening to work. The anthropic principle, that we observe a life-supporting universe because only life-supporting universes produce observers, doesn't explain why, but it explains why us. Still, the question remains, is the precision we see a fact of nature, or a reflection of how we interpret it? Are we reading meaning into structure, or are we uncovering meaning that's already there? That's where belief steps in. Not to answer definitively, but to suggest, to imagine, to hold open the door. Not everything needs to be resolved. Some parts of life are lived better with questions still intact, which brings us close to the end, though not a conclusion. Because the final question isn't whether Earth was designed or by whom. It's how we live in it now with the systems we've inherited. The air, the water, the timing, the patterns. The chance to reflect, to imagine, to build. The question never really leaves. It just quiets down sometimes. In the middle of work, in the noise of cities, in the patterns of habit, it fades. But then something brings it back. A night sky, a fragile fossil, a perfectly timed event. And there it is again, hovering under the surface. Is all of this something we found, or something we were meant to find? Designed or discovered? Built or emerged? Those two ideas have different roots, but they often land in the same place, at the edge of what we can explain, looking out. If Earth is a design, then it is the most intricate one ever encountered. Every molecule positioned, every cycle balanced, every feedback loop delicately layered into the next. A system that sustains itself across billions of years, that recycles and reshapes, that allows not only for survival, but for understanding. That by itself would be a kind of miracle, not one of spectacle, but of quiet structure. And if Earth is not a design, if it was discovered by itself through the slow push and pull of physics and chemistry and time, then it is no less remarkable. Because what it discovered was itself, a planet that became aware, a process that looped back and saw the process, life that learned to ask. Either way, the result is the same. We are here, thinking, watching, wondering, making tools, making sense, making stories. We study cells, galaxies, equations, ourselves. We map things not because we're told to, but because we need to know where we are. And we are here, not just physically, Not just on a rock orbiting a star, but fully here. Aware of the conditions that allowed awareness, able to reflect on what came before and imagine what might come next. Whatever else that is, it's rare. And maybe that's enough to hold on to, even if the origin remains unsolved. Maybe the power isn't in knowing the answer. Maybe it's in being able to ask. Because the systems continue, with or without a final explanation. The rotation of the Earth, the pull of the Moon, the breath of the atmosphere, the rise and fall of ecosystems, the ongoing dance of genes and memory and environment. The rules haven't changed, but now we see them. And seeing them doesn't require certainty. It just requires presence, attention, a willingness to accept that some things are structured and strange and stunning. Not because they were made for us, but because we're able to see them at all. That might be design, that might be chance, but either way it's discovery, and it's still unfolding. Thanks for spending this time here. Not rushing, not reaching, just sitting with a question that doesn't need to be solved to be worth asking. Whether Earth was designed or discovered, whether these systems are intended or emergent, the world remains no less astonishing. And you, here now, listening, breathing, aware, are part of that system too. Sleep well or think long, there's no pressure either way. The planet will keep turning, the patterns will continue, and the questions, or the good ones, will still be here in the morning. Good night.